Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 84, Darcy and Natasha. With Loki and Tony out of the labs, Darcy's job was a lot easier. She really only had to wrangle Jane. Betty, while every bit the science geek that Jane was pretty good at policing herself and dragging Bruce with her for food. There wasn't much in the way of dragging when it came to sleep. Not that Darcy blamed them. Honestly, if there were to be a cutest couple competition, Bruce and Betty would win. Jane and Thor were a close second, mostly because Thor could be ridiculously adorable without trying. Pepper was too badass to be anything even remotely resembling cute, and Tony was entirely too obnoxious, so they were dead last. Today, though, looked like it was going to be one of those rare days when Darcy had to drag everyone out of the labs. The triad had all trooped to the labs at some ungodly hour and had been bent over. Well, Darcy was quite content to be ignorant of what they were doing, because there were an awful lot of maliciously pleased looks and near maniacal giggling going on. Anyway, they'd been bent over computer monitors and the beginnings of what Darcy sincerely hoped was a non-working model of whatever the hell since she arrived in the labs for breakfast. Darcy had a sneaking suspicion that whatever they were working on was going to be rammed down Hydra throats. Sideways. By Hulk. The really scary part was that Jarvis was helping them. Had volunteered the use of several of Tony's machines in his lab if they ended up needing them. Darcy was building up some strong suspicions regarding Jarvis, but she wasn't going to say anything. Yet. Mostly because she wasn't entirely sure she was right. And if she was right, well, saying something might make Tony and Jarvis twitchy. Because if she was right, that sort of thing was not portrayed well in stories, and they'd assume the worst. Honestly, the way the gang was reacting to the news regarding Hydra, Steve would be lucky to have any targets at all by the time he got back. Pepper and Samet had gone into information acquisition mode, and Darcy was pretty sure Natasha was prepping to go terrify the holy hell out of some assholes in an effort to get information her way. From what Darcy had overheard, Pepper was digging into everyone attached to SI, because if there were Hydra moles in various places, SI would be a good place to have one. They'd been dealing in weapons for a long time, and even after Tony put a stop to that, having a mole on the inside to report on Tony's movements would be a good thing for the bad guys. Samet had been muttering about the probability of S.H.I.E.L.D. being compromised, which really was a no-brainer. S.H.I.E.L.D. was a spy organization. The odds of such a thing being lousy with double agents was really, really freaking high. At any rate, the science squad had been working since, oh my god, o'clock, and while Darcy had managed to get protein bars in them when she first arrived, and of course coffee by the gallon, actual food had been distinctly lacking. Right, time for an intervention. Darcy clapped her hands. Okay, children, it is past lunchtime, and since I know for a fact you guys haven't stopped your mad cackling to eat more than a protein bar in... She glanced at the clock. At least 4 hours, and I am reasonably certain none of you stopped for breakfast before coming down here at Old Dark 100. It is time to stop for food before people get cranky. That made Bruce give her a halfway guilty look that Darcy waved aside. Not you, Bruce. Her. Darcy pointed at Jane. You do not want to see her food deprived. It gets ugly. Don't even think about caffeine deprived, or worse, both. Darcy shuddered. There had been one no caffeine and no food incident very early in her internship with Jane. Never again. Hulk has nothing on her when she's on a roll. There's a reason I hound her about eating. I'm getting mad, except even I know it's true, Darcy said with a shrug. Fair enough, Bruce said, still looking amused. I am kind of hungry anyway. The four of them trooped to the common entertainment floor, and Darcy started raiding the kitchen. So, what exactly were you lot working on in there, or do I want to know? There was a disconcerting amount of maniacal giggling going on, Darcy asked as she got out plates and packages of sliced meats, breads, and condiments. Well, we kind of got thinking late last night, Betty said. Historically, Hydra agents have a habit of suiciding via a poisoned tooth. If we're going to get any kind of information out of them, we need to prevent them from doing that. I have some rather esoteric knowledge regarding plants, thanks to my efforts to deal with Hulk, Bruce said. But my ability to slap together some sort of delivery system aren't good, at least not as soon as we're going to need it. If I had a few weeks or a month, I'd be fine, but we're going to start hunting these people down pretty much the instant Steve and Tony get back, because Steve is really going to need acceptable targets. Not kidding, Marcy agreed. So you, remembered that Jane kludged together her equipment since Tony's not here to wow us with his tech? Bruce nodded. We called her. She asked. I needed something to do, Jane admitted. I was having trouble sleeping. Yeah, a lot of that going around, I think, Darcy admitted. So we've been talking options and payload and delivery systems, Bruce said. It has to be something fast-acting that can prevent them from doing the tooth thing. If they still actually do that, or from grabbing a more traditional means of killing themselves, like a gun or knife or syringe full of who knows what. And it needs to be something that doesn't need to be calibrated for body weights or metabolisms or anything like that in order to work, Betty put in. Because any bases we break into are going to have a variety of people in them, and we won't really have time to measure dosages. We thought Clint might be a best bet for delivery. Arrows are pretty quiet, and hitting people wouldn't raise too many alarms. But if we hit a big base, having more than one person armed with that stuff would be a good thing. So we started talking about darts and dart guns, Jane said. Darcy blinked at them. So, busy morning then. Yeah. We haven't agreed on what to use yet. Bruce is sort of leaning towards making something special, since a lot of the stuff we can think of either doesn't work as fast as we're going to need it to, or has side effects that will make dealing with the captured agents a lot more trouble, Betty said. And they wouldn't have a viable antidote for something purpose-made, where they might for something commercial, Darcy said with a nod. Once everything was out, she pushed plates at everyone politely, and the three scientists started putting sandwiches together. And then I got to thinking, these people are pros. They might be a bit more resistant to questioning than we'd like, Bruce said, and having a way to get them talk might be a good idea. So I've been toying with something that might work. Yeah, that might have been the source of the giggling then, Darcy said. She really didn't want to think about what Bruce might have cooked up for that. Talk about scary territory. And I'll need an antidote for whatever I cook up, because we may have to get ugly to get them to talk, but we're not monsters, so once we get their tongues loose... Bruce shrugged. Yeah. Anyway, Jane figured she might as well figure out a dart for that stuff too, so we don't have to get in close to administer it. After that, talk drifted to other things. Darcy made her own sandwich and sat back and watched them talk. Anyone who said geeks weren't utterly terrifying was so very, very wrong. Darcy would probably be pleased to know her guess about Natasha was right. This particular mission called for a level of invisibility that Natasha normally didn't need. She normally could walk right into someone's life as, well, whatever worked, and go from there. But these people had made her. Made the other widows. The likelihood of them recognizing her if they actually saw her, regardless of her disguise, was far too high. Natasha chose one of her most form-fitting uniforms, one that came with a hood to hide her very distinctive hair. Despite the form-fitting nature of the uniform, there were a lot of places to hide things. 2 garrots, because one could be lost or snap or be pressed into surface as a tripwire, 10 knives of varying sizes, 4 stilettos, a lockpick kit, over a dozen small needles coated with sleeping agents, 4 thumb drives for any computer she hacked, her bites, by far the clunkiest part of her outfit. She'd have to see if Tony would make her something more streamlined, a handful of very compact, low-yield explosives, suitable for blowing computer hard drives to shrapnel once she'd downloaded all the information on them, and of course the string in the hood, which could be pulled out and used as a weapon. This once, she forewent her guns. They were too loud, even silenced, for use in extreme covert situations. The hardest part had been convincing Clint to stay behind. He'd wanted to go with to watch her back. Unfortunately, as good as he was, the odds that he'd be spotted were too high for comfort. Hydra would be watching the areas around their bases. If they didn't, they were idiots. They had thus far not shown much of a bent towards idiocy, except in their choices of subjects. So Natasha was taking no chances. Besides, she had a lot of anger to burn, and she disliked Clint or Phil seeing her when she was hunting in that sort of mood. They were fully aware of who and what she was, but she still didn't like them seeing her in that mode. It had ironically been one of the first things she'd figured out about herself once they'd brought her in. Who she had been, what she had done, was not a source of pride and never would be. She was grateful she had the skills in the now, but no, those days would never be good memories. At the moment, she was studying the blueprints for the building that Hydra was using in New York. Or well, the one they'd identified. The likelihood of there being at least one other base in the city was very high. The base was a scientific one from the information Jarvis had dug up. From the look of it, Hydra's research into the serum was ongoing, despite their continued lack of success in producing someone like Steve. Even she, the best of the widows, didn't quite match Steve point for point, and it wasn't just because he was a man and therefore capable of more muscle mass than a female. She healed slower than Steve did, and aged, though they had no way of knowing if Steve didn't age yet. He'd not been alive long enough for aging to become a noticeable factor. The time in the ice messed with that. But she'd aged over the years. Not normally, to be sure, but she did look like she was in her 30s rather than like a teen or 20-something if she'd stopped aging at some point. Jarvis, do you have any other information on the building? Natasha asked. Darcy wasn't alone in her suspicions about Jarvis. Natasha had met Jarvis before anyone other than Phil had, and had interacted with the AI more than Phil. Jarvis acted entirely too human to be just anything, never mind a computer program. And Natasha knew Tony well enough to know he'd never accept sufficient or second best in anything. If he decided to build a computer AI, he'd go whole hog. Not that Natasha would say anything. She, of them all, understood having and protecting secrets. She would hold Jarvis's until such time as he spoke up about it. Though at this rate, it wouldn't be long before Jarvis's secret became a non-secret. He'd been really overly helpful with the Hydra situation. It was hard to tell without a facial expression to work with, but Natasha was fairly certain that Jarvis was a bit pissed about Yelena escaping and wanted to get even. The problem with that being that he was making it more and more obvious that he was a lot more than a computer program fulfilling requests by approved operators. I have, in fact, Jarvis said, I have been able to break into their security system without alerting them to my presence. Unfortunately, while their security system has elements I can summon, their computer system is completely cut off from the internet and thus beyond my ability to usurp. I have, however, been able to observe the last 2 shifts in the building. Natasha gave the nearest camera a fangy grin. She could really get used to having a self-aware sapient computer as an ally. Let's have it, Jarvis. There are 10 scientists, and there was enough sarcasm in that word to flow the helicarrier, in the building at all times. 15 during daylight hours. The security is mostly electronic in nature, with only a dozen security guards to cover all shifts. I suspect this is to keep from drawing too much attention to themselves. 10 extra people going in and out are unlikely to be noticed. 30 or more would be. Natasha nodded. Agreed. 3 of the labs have airlocks and contain a variety of volatile chemicals that can easily be converted into a means of attack. All doors are electronically controlled, but there are 3 checkpoints with a guard each, 1 on each level of the base. 1 more guard per floor walks patrol. There are a number of infiltration countermeasures, but they are all electronically controlled via the guard stations. Jarvis finished, sounding disturbingly smug. This is going to be a cakewalk, isn't it? Natasha asked. Quite, Agent Romanov, Jarvis agreed.